All right. Welcome, everyone. Hi, guys. How are you today?
Great.
We are going to get started here in just a moment. All right. So without further ado, welcome, everyone, to today's CyberWise chat. I'm Diana Graber, the author of Raising Humans in a Digital World and also the founder of CyberWise and CyberCivics. Here, as always, with Dr. Pamela Rutledge, who's the director of the Media Psychology Research Center. And we're really excited to welcome our special guest today, Taylor Blatchford. Taylor is a graduate student at the University of Alabama, where she presents her campaign Text to Regret that she'll tell you about in a moment. She presents it in classrooms, both in person and virtually, and we're also so honored that she teaches the cyber civics curriculum. All of this is going to come in really handy today, where she can share her firsthand experience with the topic, not only by working with young people, but by obviously being a young person herself. So as you know, we're here to talk about kids and dating in the digital age. So during the pandemic, the only option for many teens to maintain and forge new relationships has been online. This includes romantic relationships. So something like a pesky pandemic is going to stop teens from participating in what is a very normal and developmentally appropriate rite of passage. So before we talk about that, I'm going to turn to Taylor, put her on the spot. We met Taylor because she wrote a fantastic blog post for us about a personal experience she had in high school that led her to start Text to Regret. So I'm going to let her explain that to you. Take it away, Taylor.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you both so much for having me today. I am very honored to engage in this discussion, and I'm very excited to talk about online dating. I started my Text to Regret campaign in 2019 after I had an ex-boyfriend try pressuring me into sending nude photos of myself to him. And it was from there that I realized internet safety education is really lacking in our communities. And a lot of young people are simply not equipped with the tools they need to go into high school and adulthood, knowing how to appropriately behave online. So that's where I found cyber civics, and I was super honored to connect with y'all back a couple months ago and write that blog post. And I'm really, really excited to continue discussing these topics today.
Well, we are so honored. I feel so grateful to have met Taylor. I think I actually met you via a FOSI.
Yes, yes, the
Thing.
FOSI webinar.
Yeah,
Yes,
so thank you to FOSI.
yes, thank you.
So grateful to have you on board. So we're going to jump right in here, and we're going to go back and forth with different questions, but we always try to ask for questions ahead of time. And I love this one because it's the one we got asked most, and I think that Pam will love answering it. Should parents allow their teens to date online?
Well, as you know, I love this question because this idea that parents can control their kids' online behavior is sort of a marvel, right? Because kids are moving across devices. They have 24/7 access. They can hack anything that restricts them. They have friends with devices. So you're not going to control their behavior. The best thing you can do is arm them so that they can behave safely and with some integrity and self-respect. And I think that's really one of the themes today that I took away from Taylor's story, is how important it is that you give people the right to set boundaries and to establish relationships where they feel respected. So it isn't a question of allow, it's a question of prepare.
Exactly. Would you agree with that, Taylor?
Yes, absolutely. Because when I was going through that experience myself, what I realized pretty early on is how lucky I personally was to be prepared by my parents for those kind of situations. Because my parents were always very upfront with my sister and I about what consequences could ensue by partaking in dangerous online behavior. But I pretty quickly realized that a lot of my other peers did not have that same education in their life. And so you're absolutely right, Pam, in the sense that you're never going to stop a teenager from participating in online behavior or whatever they want to in life. But you do have to prepare them, because that's the only true mistake that could be made, is just not preparing.
Yeah, because their world is on and offline. There isn't a division. Those of us who are like super old, we're like going, oh, online, as if it's some different place. But for these kids, especially now after COVID, it's not a different place. And the skills that you need online aren't different from the skills that you need offline. So it's not like you're wasting your time training kids to behave online when they're just the skills they need to succeed in life.
Yeah, and
Yes.
what really struck me when my own kids were, one of my daughters was entering high school, her first week, there, one of the girls that she'd done junior lifeguards with got wrapped up in a sexting scandal. And what she'd done is she sent a boy who was older than 17 a picture of herself in her bra. And all of a sudden, the police showed up on campus, and it became this really serious issue, which was so unfortunate because like they had no idea what the consequences were. No one had taught them. And my daughter luckily had gone to a school that had cyber civics. So she went in there saying, I can't believe these kids didn't know what sexting is or what the consequences were. So if a parent's not introducing it to them, or a school's not, these poor kids, they're engaging in stuff that they may have no idea the price they have to pay later. So
Yes. And I think, especially when it comes to issues like sexting, that's probably why so many kids partake in that behavior, is because they don't know the consequences. I truly believe that a lot of them go into that behavior thinking, oh, it's okay, it's just another photo, and it's not really going to go anywhere. But if kids were more aware of what the actual physical consequences were, they would be thinking about it before behaving in that way.
Yeah, so we're going to talk more about sexting at the end of this, but before we get there, I do want to spend a moment talking about the apps and platforms that kids are using to connect online to have relationships. I wrote an article recently about this for Psychology Today, did a little research. And in my research, I'm going to share what popped up. So My LOL is a self-proclaimed #1 teen network in the world. Its site encourages teens to meet thousands of teenagers like you. You've got to be 13 to use it, but according to Common Sense Media, who does great reviews and all this stuff, they say that users often post provocative, half-naked pictures of themselves and engage in flirty or even sexually explicit conversations. Another one that popped up was Yubo. A lot of it describes itself as a place where anyone can belong, feel safe, and hang out. That's been described as a hookup app because of the swipe left feature. And then finally, Scout was another one that's been referred to as a flirting app. This one, you have to be 17 years old to use it. So I'm going to tell you, what I found. That's what the research said. I'm around middle school kids all the time. None of them ever use these apps that I've heard of. So I think really kids are having relationships on all kinds of platforms. Maybe you can enlighten us about that, Taylor.
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, there are the traditional dating apps. I'm in college right now. So, the most popular one where I'm at during this point in my life is Tinder, which is widely accepted as a hookup app. I've heard of a few successful relationships come out of Tinder, but it's very far and few between. And there are other apps like Hinge and Bumble. But what I talked about during our pre-chat the other day was how a lot of the times students and children are forming these online relationships on apps that aren't specifically made for dating. A lot of the time, these relationships are starting on apps like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok, which is especially new. And it goes to show that online relationships can start on any of these apps. It doesn't specifically have to be a dating app.
Just like real life, right? You meet people, in the hall, or, you just can't go in the hall right now. So these social apps are essentially where kids are hanging out. And I wanted to just point out that it's so important to train kids because they don't have the cognitive maturity to really anticipate long-range consequences until they're about middle 20s. So it's really important to not try and scare them, but to try and lay out a realistic potential outcome so that they can, take that into consideration in a very concrete kind of way.
Right. And before we leave the topic about where kids hook up on these apps, a couple things. I remember when my own daughters were using Club Penguin, and they used to show me the penguins that were dating. So I guess that was a dating app, right? So anything can be a dating app. And we have to remember our kids have only had online opportunities to meet and have relationships for a long time. So it's so natural for them to extend what they would do in real life to online. But there's a couple, I want to talk a little bit about vocabulary here. When I talk to my own daughters about this, they tell me, Mom, Tinder's a hookup app and such and such is a dating app. And again, I'm going to turn to Taylor, like, what is the difference?
Ooh, well, I think the difference, it's okay. I think the difference can be almost found in the way you described it. You just described it very well just then. Like a hookup app is where you meet people and it might lead to just hanging out with them once or a one night stand or something like that. And then there's other apps that are intended to lead to an actual relationship. So it always depends, I guess, on what that person and the other people on the apps are looking for.
Yeah. So that brings us to a question that we got asked too. What if your child is dating someone online that you don't know?
What would you do if your child were dating anyone, right? That you would try and ask questions. And I think that the hardest part about online is that it's very easy for parents to get very worked up and freaked out. And so, taking a deep breath before you start asking questions is really important, and being curious rather than judgmental. The other thing that I would say to parents is when your teens are just starting to explore other relationships, do not tease them. I have seen so many parents think they're having fun by, oh, somebody has a girlfriend or somebody has a boyfriend. There's nothing that closes that door to communication faster than somebody feeling like they're being minimized or disrespected, even if you think it's all in good fun. So be curious and compassionate. Let them explain what's going on as much as they're willing, so that they'll trust your advice when you have it.
Yes. And sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Taylor.
I was going to say, when it comes to your children dating people online that they don't know, I think it's more wise to focus on making sure that it's someone who's safe. Because if it's someone in their class that maybe you don't know, there's a big difference between that and a complete stranger who might not be their age, who might be trying to catfish them or traffic them or lead them into a very much more serious situation than simply just talking to someone they don't know.
Right. And I think it's so important to remind parents that most online relationships are an extension of offline relationships. And even though we're not having those right now, they're an extension of people kids already know, like in a class or through something in a sport or whatever. So, we worry about kids connecting with strangers online, and that's just a small percentage of what happens, which isn't to say that we shouldn't prepare kids with what Taylor just talked about, like how to identify if it's a stranger, how to vet them, and to have that open line of communication, because that does happen.
Yeah, the numbers suggest that most of the activities kids have online are fine. But of course, if it's your kid, you don't want it to be one of the ones that's not. And the way to protect them is exactly what Diana's talking about.
Right. And the one thing I noticed in my research is, like, we haven't given kids any kind of etiquette training at all. Like, dating is hard enough in real life, and then it becomes very complicated online. Like, one thing kids don't know how to do well is like how to end a relationship. I think a lot of times people will ghost each other. And Taylor, you want to explain what ghosting is? Because I've noticed that that's very common with kids because they don't have the social mechanisms taught to them on how to break up respectfully online. So they'll just ghost.
Yes. So ghosting is basically when you leave someone hanging, you just don't talk to them anymore. So you could have gone on a few dates with them, you could be talking to them, and you could have basically started the beginnings of a relationship. And then ghosting is when you completely just stop talking to them, period. And it's usually very confusing, and it's definitely not smiled upon at all in the world of dating. Usually it's seen as very rude, very, very unkind and inconsiderate of the person you were talking to.
Yeah, and I will say it's not just young people. I have two friends my age that have been ghosted by people online that they thought they were forming a relationship with. So I think this idea of online etiquette extends across all generations. We have not established proper rules or formalities on how to do this online. So I think it's time for us to talk about that with our children.
Some people aren't good at it offline either, I mean, and so what I wonder is whether that needs to be bundled in helping kids to understand what is a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Because a healthy relationship means you're talking. Ghosting should not be necessary. Right. So that means somebody's conflict avoidant, that they haven't learned the skills to know how to be honest and, and forthright. And so, I mean, absolutely, I'm all in favor of manners and, and etiquette. But I think that beyond that, I see a lot of research about especially young girls who have a very romantic idea of what it means to date and to fall in love and to find the one and to find their soulmate. And they don't get training in being themselves, demanding respect or setting boundaries. And those kind of beliefs, those romantic beliefs, can really lead someone down the path to victimization because they often will try and mold themselves to match a partner rather than recognizing that they're enough.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so sad. I noticed that a lot with young women, even as a college student. There are so many, not just women, but also men who feel like they have to fit a certain mold or behave in a certain way. And it's just so sad because that's obviously not how you pursue relationships.
Yeah, and I think the online world heightens that because it's so visually, everything is visual, especially the apps kids use, the Instagrams and all that. Using Facetune is so common and everyone wants to try to meet these unrealistic standards of beauty. And all of that is just heightened online. So I think that seeps into this whole idea of having relationships, which brings me to the other question that we got earlier this week. My teen is dating someone they met online, but I worry they'll be disappointed when they finally meet in person because virtual seems so superficial to me. That's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question.
Tackle that
Well,
one.
so I mean, some of it is what we were talking about with the romantic ideals, but online relationships, just like the love letters of old, allow people to really connect in a meaningful way. So online relationships can feel just as real and just as intimate as an offline one. And the reason that that's important is one, because when a kid comes to you and they've been broken up with, or they're very excited about something, if you minimize it because it doesn't seem real to you, you're closing that door and you're not providing them with enough support. But as Diana was saying, most of these things move from online to offline. They don't just stay in one place. So understanding, helping them to see that they can be themselves so that they're not presenting a false person.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you on that, Pam. I think something that matters a lot of the time that parents should understand is that sometimes these relationships are starting in person, but then they're extending online. So that definitely backs up the point you just gave.
Yeah, and I want to remind people, please feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. We just got one that says, I think whether it is online dating or in-person dating, the foundation is really to teach our kids how to set boundaries, how to stay true to themselves, and to be sure to teach them that often what we see online is not reality, especially in regards to body image. And boy, does that ring true. One of the most powerful lessons that I get to do through cyber civics with 8th graders is stereotypes in the media. And we look a lot at different imagery and how things are manipulated and they're not really what they seem. And I can tell those kind of lessons go so deep with both the boys and girls because it's something that they struggle with every single day when they use these apps and their devices.
Yeah, I think the parents should also know that some places where kids hang out, like online games, they don't just restrict their connectivity to being in the game. So they feel the presence of their friends and potential romantic partners in the avatars, but they're also FaceTiming at the same time, or they're on the phone at the same time. So they've got a different kind of connection that's no less real and no less powerful than if they were all sitting around a board game in the living room. So it becomes a very very tangible experience.
Right. So how do you know when your child's ready to online date?
Were you ready to date?
I think I'm not a parent yet. I've got a long way to go before I get there. But personally, I would say if they have the social and emotional skills that they would have to date in person. Diana, I actually read your book over winter break. I haven't told you that yet, but I read it. And I remember one of the things that stood out to me when I read that book was how parents were asking the question, how do I know if my child is ready to go online? How do I know if they're ready to have a social media account? And if I'm not mistaken, I think your response was if they have those social and emotional skills they would need in person to be kind and have a good, positive environment and translate that to being online. And I think the same applies to dating. Definitely, if they're ready for it and they're showing that they're mature enough for it in person, then they will have a much easier time navigating it online.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. And thank you for reading my book. That's so, you don't even have children yet, so I'm very, very grateful. But I totally still believe that so strongly, that these are skills we want kids to have, regardless of whether they're online or not. They're going to start having these relationships, in their adolescence, and think of how much time they've lost during the pandemic. So to have these relationships online is so normal. Plus, there's plus sides. There's, teen pregnancy is down, kids aren't drinking and driving, all of
Right.
that stuff are the upsides, which brings me to the next question. What are the benefits of online dating?
Well, we know that the amount of online use has gone up during COVID. I mean, it's gone up for, every population, not just teens. But what people may not know is that the amount of anxiety and depression among teens and kids has also really skyrocketed. Cyberbullying, all those things is about the same, but these sort of mental distress from lack of peer pressure has really created a lot of depression and anxiety among teens.
Yeah.
So what social media has allowed kids to do is approximate some way of reclaiming that relationship that are so appropriate and so necessary as they're going through their teenage years, trying to figure out who they are and how they fit in the world. It's impossible to do that without peer interaction. And so they're getting it in every way they can online. So it's actually good that they're online right now, because it would be terrible if they were isolated without it.
Right. And someone thanked us for, Mary thanked us for bringing up gaming. And I want to just reiterate that, kids aren't really using dating apps per se. Maybe some are, but more commonly, they're creating these relationships on apps they already use. And right now, gaming is huge. Snapchat, huge. A lot of this is happening on Snapchat, TikTok rising. So that's the sort of places to look. But games too, people forget that that's social media. Kids are interacting, they're talking. Gaming has gone up substantially during the pandemic for a lot of reasons, because they can connect and it's fun. So, be aware that kids are having relationships on these different places where they're interacting all the time.
Well, and most of the dating apps, you're supposed to be 18.
Yeah.
Right. So
there's those few that I mentioned that bill themselves as 13 and up, but you're right.
We know no one's on, right?
Yeah.
Those apps.
Yeah.
Right. They're supposed to be 18, but
Right.
Sometimes, I'm sure y'all have heard the story before where a kid will lie about their age just to get on the app and see what's out there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, salacious stuff that young kids really don't need to be seeing. But you're right, they're curious, and that's also normal. So what are some risks of online dating?
I think one of the greatest risks is, in a way, not being able to have that in-person interaction, because in some ways that's a benefit. And I know we just discussed that, because it's good, especially during the pandemic, that they're getting interaction, period. But I think one of the risks can be that teenagers are trying to find other ways to find the same value in romantic relationships as they would in person. And sometimes that can translate to a lot of different risks.
Right.
I think that one of the things, and and you're so knowledgeable about this, Diana, but some of the real rabbit holes are things that essentially count as dating violence, coercive activities like Taylor was talking about at the beginning, feeling the pressure to provide sex or to do things that can have some very negative consequences. And someone young might just think, oh, well, I'm just doing this for my boyfriend or girlfriend and it doesn't really matter, without understanding the legal ramifications along with everything. And Diane, I'll turn that back over to you, because you're more up to date on which states are going to do what.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to me that sexting is in some ways considered normal. And that drives me nuts, because that just shows our lack of education. We have not taught kids, and the laws have not caught up to where the reality is. So for those of you who don't know, sexting is the sending or receiving, that's very important, of sexually suggestive nude or semi-nude images via electronic device. So think about that for a second. You're a sex offender if someone sends you an image of an underage person who's half naked. So a lot of kids don't know that. And in some states, individuals who distribute, possess, or produce a sexually explicit image of a minor could be charged under their state's child pornography laws. So you might check your own state. Every state is different. Some are way stricter than others. But the bottom line is, kids, and this is what I learned from kids teaching them about this topic, is they see Kim Kardashian or whoever on the internet every day, practically naked, right? They send a similar image of themselves to somebody they're in a relationship with, and that's considered child pornography. So get that across to your teens, because that's a very important thing for them to know. And also that it's okay to say no to these kind of things. A lot of kids, as Taylor was saying, feel pressured because they did not have the advantage of having parents like Taylor did to tell her, hey, you can say no, to know that it's okay not to give in to every request that you get online. So this is, if anything, I think this is a super, super important conversation to have with your children.
And if it's too difficult, if you don't feel very confident that if you say don't do that, they're going to feel okay to not do that, brainstorm with them or role play, well, what would happen if somebody did something? Well, how would that feel? And, what are different ways to respond? What would it feel like to say no? What would happen if you said yes? What's a middle ground? So that they've had some chance to think things through. The best way to influence future behaviors to have someone have a model in their head of what they can do. And role playing is a perfect way to give them those patterns so that they don't have to think it up from scratch.
Right.
Yes, I think a lot about the emotional effects that engaging in that kind of behavior could have, especially if later on those photos get out. I know, Diana, you shared a really interesting story that your coworker Peter went through with one of his students. And if you want to share that story, I think it's a perfect example of what can happen.
Yeah, you know what? It is really, it's an important story to share. It's what you would call revenge porn. Peter, who was our wonderful outreach director at Cyber Civics, he actually was a former English teacher and coach, and he left his high school and started working with us because of this incident. There was a girl at his school, very popular cheerleader, that was in a relationship with a boy on the football team or whatever. They exchanged nude photos. They had a terrible breakup. Upon breakup, he shared her photos around the school. Everyone saw it. She paid a high price. She was kicked off the cheerleading squad. She tried to join anything, in order to have a group to belong to. So she tried to join the tennis team without ever playing tennis before. He was the coach of that. That's how he met her. But he said he just saw this really buoyant, outgoing young woman completely change because of this one incident. And he's like, this is ridiculous. That can never happen again. So, these are the conversations we need to have with our kids. It might feel okay in the moment, but to understand the impact of your digital reputation, it goes hand in hand with that basic knowledge that we've got to tell our kids, if something's online for a moment, it could be online forever. So you don't want that to be your embarrassing photos.
Yeah, and with the other day when we were chatting, Taylor, you sort of confirmed one of the things that I was thinking about, which is that you can't always rely on peer pressure to inform your son or daughter. In other words, if they have friends that have done these things, they're going to need your child to do it too, just to make themselves feel better. So, and I know, Taylor, you were saying that you had seen examples of both that and the double standard between boys thinking it's cool and girls paying the price when it comes to sexting.
Right. There is definitely a double standard. And speaking to the peer pressure element of it, I remember even back when my ex-boyfriend was trying to pressure me into sending those nude photos, I was friends with a lot of his friends and friends with a lot of their girlfriends. And I knew it was happening with all of them. And so I think back now as someone who's much older, and I've had a few years to think back on that experience in hindsight. And I realize now that was probably playing into the experience altogether. He probably felt like, okay, in order for me to fit into my friend group, or in order for me to have this experience, this needs to happen. And so that really does go to show the peer pressure element that can go into that. And then going off of the other example that Diana gave, or excuse me, Pam, the example you gave about the double standard with men and women. The story that Peter shared is a perfect example. A lot of the times women are paying the price for these photos being shared, unfortunately, and they will get kicked off of their team. And sometimes there aren't exactly the equal consequence for the male sharing those photos, which is a whole another discussion in and of itself, but it goes to show that the double standard does exist.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
going
a
to read a
societal
comment we've
problem.
got.
Sorry.
It's a
Yes.
little long, but I think it's important. Thanks for sharing your insights. As a high school teacher and parent for two, what I observe is high schoolers hormonally, physiologically, mentally, and in terms of their to be developed neural wiring in regards to intense feelings like love, dating, are not ready to experience dating, online dating. As a mentor and teacher, am I to recommend them literally to avoid dating and learning to put limits to the balance of their relationships with their friends? Online or in person, as Dr. Rutledge puts so well, they are prone to the same feelings which are mostly press their mental health. Do you think channeling their friendship interest to a future time after 18 college may be saying, first you have to find a job, graduate, earn your livelihood to sustain this relationship before you should learn and limit your relationships is a good idea?
Good luck with that.
That's what I say. Again, I go back to Club Penguin. My kids saw kids dating, playing Club Penguin when they were 8 years old. So.
Right. Yeah. All the talk about, shipping and, matching people up. I do think that you need to prepare kids. And I do think that you can encourage them to have activities that aren't singularly romantic, another group events or group games or hanging out. I mean, I think that's where gaming is so positive, is that kids play games, online games with more than one person, or they're interacting in a crowd, or some of the platforms that like Roblox that allows you to set up a server so all your friends can be in the same area on the virtual world. So there are ways of encouraging connectivity that aren't necessarily dating, but the best prevention is really training. I mean, is to really have those conversations.
And the other thing I would say about that is if you do have your kids doing it a bit younger, they're more likely to have you involved or answer your questions, or you can, play these games with them and see what's happening. And that allows you to have that platform to have a conversation before they're 18 and they're not going to listen to you anymore.
And I think another important thing to realize, and this is just speaking from personal experience, all of those things like finding a job, graduating, earning a livelihood, you're going to naturally form relationships of all kinds by partaking in those activities. So it's almost impossible to limit the romantic relationship aspect of that as well, because that's just naturally going to come with it. So it's just about being open and having those conversations, as you were saying.
Yeah. And dating etiquette. I think, sitting down and talking about some basic dating etiquette, whether it's online or offline, super important. So this brings us to our takeaway section. Hopefully this is useful. We try to wrap up with just our top tips in regards to this topic that hopefully will help you as you try to navigate this with your own young people. So Taylor, I'm going to go to you first. Like, as a young person yourself, what would be your top tips to people today?
For the young people, I would stress that do not be afraid of the adults in your life and what they might think of you in these situations you're navigating. I remember personally when I was going through my situation and when I was 17 years old, I was terrified for a pretty extensive amount of time to tell my parents what happened. I eventually did, but I was really scared at first because it's hard to have those conversations with adults. It's really hard to have those conversations with parents. Not because you don't believe they care, but because it's hard. It's really uncomfortable to go to an adult with that. So if there are any young people listening, I would stress, trust the adults in your life. They want to help you. They care for you, and they really do want to help you through whatever weird romantic situation you're going through.
That's such great advice. I really appreciate you saying that, because we do care. We do want to help, So thank you.
Right. Yeah. And the flip side of that is the parents, be aware how difficult that is for kids and make it as easy as possible. Don't avoid the problem, but don't be judgmental. Ask questions. Don't give them the third degree, but be curious and supportive rather than the Grand Inquisitor, because what you're really trying to do is establish a bridge of trust. The earlier you start, as we say every single time, the earlier you start, the easier it is for them to come to you when something happens. You know, and then the other thing that I would say is in this situation, focus on not online or offline, but what constitutes a healthy relationship. You know, what does it mean to be respected? What does it mean to have dating violence online, coerced behaviors, so that they understand that a healthy relationship is something they have a right to, and they understand that it's not a Hallmark or Disney movie.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, from my personal experience teaching sexting lessons to 8th graders for many years, I have yet to walk into an 8th grade class where nearly everyone has either been asked for a nude or has heard of someone being asked for a nude. And this is 8th grade. So this is happening out there. We need to talk to our kids about it. And I'd say for my tips, I'd make sure that kids know that saying no is okay, online and off. If something makes you uncomfortable, it's fine to say no. I think also not to respond immediately to anything, to just think about it for a moment. Turn your device off now and then. It's healthy to have little breaks. Keep your logins and passwords to yourself so that there is no opportunity for people to get to anything on your phone that you don't want shared. And lastly, you should feel respected always, online and off, in all your relationships, whether they're romantic or just with friends. So that's what I did with. And I do want to say before we end too, tomorrow when we send our thank you for attending, we're going to be sharing our sexting lesson with you. Hopefully you'll have an opportunity to share that with young people or students in your own life. So
Great
any last words from either of you guys?
No, I always, you know, appreciate the fact that what we're trying to do is help parents, teachers, whomever, connect, you know, sort of authentically or transparently with kids so that you can actually help them, which is really the whole point of this, is going in with a certain amount of knowledge and trying to share that accurately with them.
Yeah.
Yes, and I just appreciate that these conversations are being held, period, because I know my generation, we are very used to social media. We're very used to being online, but we can still remember a time where it wasn't a big deal. And so we kind of had to learn with a lot of people in our society about how to behave online, how to interact, and learn these lessons. So it's really great that these conversations are being had so that younger people don't have to learn the hard way like we all did.
Yeah. Thank you, Taylor, so much for being here. And thank you for teaching these lessons in Alabama. I can't tell you what that means to me. And I'm so grateful that kids are learning about this stuff in school. So hopefully we can avoid some of the problems we talked about today.
It's
So thank you both. Thank you both for being here. Someone asked if these are recorded. They are. You can always find our chats on the CyberWise website under CyberWise chats. Next month, we'll be talking about how to make social media safer for students, or I'm sorry, how to make social media safer for kids. And I have a feeling you'll be seeing Taylor again. We loved having her, and it's so wonderful having that youth perspective. So thank you again. And thank you, Pamela, always for your insight and knowledge. And I
love being here. And thank you, Taylor. It was wonderful for you to make time to join us.
All right. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your day. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.